Is the Panasonic Lumix G85 worth it in 2020? Let's check it out. So I know a lot of people are looking at the Panasonic G85 right now and they're wondering, is this camera still worth it in 2020? Because this camera did come out in late 2016. And so my goal in this video is to share with you guys what I found to be some of the pros as well as the cons after using this camera for the last couple years, and hopefully give you guys enough information to help you to decide whether or not you feel this camera is worth it to you. So let's go ahead and start off with some of the pros. This camera currently goes for around $699, and depending on who you buy it from or what time of year you buy it, you can usually pick it up with a second lens or extra accessories like bags, backpacks, SD cards, extra batteries, tripods, external microphones, you name it. And so at that price, that makes this camera very hard to beat, especially for what it's capable of. This is a 4K camera that can do 30 frames per second, 24 frames per second. If you need some slow-mo, you can go down to 1080p and get up to 60 frames per second. And it produces a very good image. It's a 16 megapixel micro four thirds sensor, which is the same sensor that is in the G7, only they removed the low pass or anti-alias filter from this sensor. So that gives you a little bit of a sharper image and a little bit better color out of this camera. The kit lens that it comes with is a very good kit lens. It's much better than the kit lens that comes with the G7, but it's a 12 to 60 millimeter 3.5 to 5.6 variable aperture lens. Now, because it's a micro four thirds sensor, basically gives you a 2 times crop, which means that this lens goes from a 12 to 60 to basically a 24 to 120. That's a wide focal range, which means most of the time you can get away with just carrying one lens and be able to get most of the shots that you're wanting to acquire. The lens also is image stabilized, and so is the body on this camera. It has in-body stabilization, and it's capable of using the stabilization in tandem with the lens. And so you can get extremely good footage, smooth video footage, as well as very sharp images when using it for photography out of this camera. I can't stress the image stabilization on this camera enough. So if that's something that is very important to you, this stabilization is awesome. There are many cameras that are on the market that cost more than this that don't have in-body stabilization. And I can tell you that it's good enough to where if you do a lot of video work, most of the time you don't have to use a gimbal with this camera. And if you do a lot of photography work, it allows you to go down to lower shutter speeds handheld and still be able to get a sharp image because it's going to compensate. Most of the time I use the Panasonic S1, which is what I'm filming on now, and many people would say that that has the best image stabilization on the market. And in some cases I would say the G85 outperforms the stabilization on the S1. I don't know if it's because it's a smaller sensor, just has an easier time or what, but the stabilization on this camera is huge. So lots of times when people ask me, you know, what camera should I go for around this price range, I usually ask them, well, are you going to be doing handheld stuff or are you doing tripod stuff? Because if you're doing tripod stuff, save the money and go with the G7. Maybe get yourself a second lens or a third lens. And but if you're going to be doing a lot of handheld stuff, then go with the G85 because the handheld on this is amazing. The micro four thirds system has been out for a long time, so that means there are tons of lenses out there available for it. Lots of manufacturers make lenses for the micro four thirds system. Olympus, Panasonic, Rokinon, I mean, you name it. Lots of people make micro four thirds lenses that will fit this camera. And so the lenses are usually fairly cheap because they're small lenses, they're lightweight lenses, they don't have huge elements on them. And being that they're small makes things like ND filters cheaper. It just overall lowers the cost of getting into the system and being able to have a wide range of lenses. It also means, because it's micro four thirds, that the camera is very lightweight. It's a very small camera. Because it's small and lightweight means that you can carry this camera in a bag all day and not really get tired of it. Because it's small, you can pull it out in public. People aren't going to get intimidated by it as much. Unlike my S1, when I usually have that camera in a cage, and if I'm out in public, I usually have like my 85mm on there, and that camera is huge. People get intimidated by it, but this camera not so much, but it's still capable of producing very nice images. The other thing that is a benefit of this camera is that there is no record limit. There are lots of other cameras out there right now that still have record limits on it. It's, from what I understand, a tax thing of why they do that, but this camera has no record limit on it. So if it's important to you to be able to record for long periods of time, then this may be the camera for you because there is no record limit, unlike the G7, which does have a record limit. This camera has multiple outputs. It's got an output for micro HDMI, an output for micro USB. It's got an input for a remote. It's got an input for an external microphone, which those things are huge. The external microphone is a big one. There are lots of other manufacturers who leave that out in this price point because they want you to buy a more expensive camera, or they just feel that maybe people in this price range aren't going to use it, but they give it to you on the G85, and that's huge because if you're going to use this for video, then you want to get some kind of external audio coming into this thing. You never really want to rely on internal microphones, although the internal microphones on this are better than the internal microphones on the G7. If you're in a pinch and you're very close to the camera, it's not so bad if you're in a quiet environment, but usually you want to use an external microphone, especially if you're going to be vlogging or are in a loud environment, so that way you get good clean audio, and you can do that through the microphone input. It's also got an HDMI out. That is very important because if you up your game and you want to get an external monitor, which I've done reviews on several different ones on my channel, but you want to see on a bigger screen than the screen that is on this camera, then you can do that with the micro HDMI out. And if you really want to up your game and you want to get like an external recorder, then it will actually output 8-bit 422 instead of the internal 8-bit 420 that the camera is recording. And that extra little bit of color information helps you be able to grade in post. So it's got an articulating screen, which is something that a lot of cameras aren't coming with these days. Even my Panasonic S1 doesn't have a flip out screen like this, but this really makes a big difference if you're doing things by yourself and you don't have an external monitor. Then you're capable of seeing what's in your shot, make sure that everything's correct, all your settings are correct. Plus you can flip that screen around and be able to protect the screen when you're storing it. The touch screen is very responsive. The app for this camera is very good. If you look here, I'm actually using the app to record with my Panasonic S1, and the app that comes with the G85 as well as the G7 is very similar, and it is, a lot of people say it's the best app on the camera market right now. And I would agree because it gives you lots of control over the camera, including setting your focus. That is a big plus with this camera. If you're away from it and you can't see really the screen close enough to be able to tell whether you're in focus or not, even though it does have focus peaking, then you can use the app and be able to set focus and be able to control all your settings in the camera to make sure that you're exposed properly. The battery life on the camera is pretty decent. It seems to get better battery life than what my G7 does, even though the battery is the same battery. But it does have a decent battery life. I can usually film for close to an hour and not have to change batteries or anything like that. And so that's more than enough for my needs. But the batteries are cheap too. You can usually buy a couple batteries for this thing for a little over $20. So you can have multiple batteries and not have to spend a ton of money to be able to buy them. So that's pretty much it for what I can think of on the pros. Hopefully that gave you enough to go off of. I'm sure I probably missed a few things and we'll think of them after this video is over. But let's go ahead and get into what I feel are some of the cons of this camera. First is that it's a micro four thirds sensor. I know I said that that is a benefit, but it is also a con in some ways. Because it's a micro four thirds sensor means it's a much smaller sensor when compared to a full frame camera, which means not as much light is going to hit that sensor because it's smaller. So in low light situations, it's not going to do as good as a full frame camera, although full frame cameras are much more expensive. But if low light situations are something that you find yourself either shooting video or taking pictures in often, then a micro four thirds system may not be for you, and this camera may not be for you. The other thing about the micro four thirds system, which I already touched bases on, is the 2x crop. Again, that's a benefit for lenses because you're able to get lenses that can zoom in farther than a full frame camera for much cheaper, but you also have to be able to compose your shots differently because of the fact that it's cropped in 2 times. So like this 12mm is not a 12mm, it's a 24. So in order to get the same thing that a 12 would get, I have to get farther back. But then that changes your depth of field. So if you want those really blown out background shots and things like that, that full frames are famous for, it's going to be much more difficult to get that out of this, and you will need much faster glass in order to do that. So that is also a con of this camera, but you kind of just learn to deal with it. I've learned to deal with it over the years, and it really doesn't bother me at all. There are lots of people who use the micro four thirds system and love it. Just look up the G85 and G85S. Another con that I can think of is the fact that it's a micro HDMI. It is a plus that it has micro HDMI, but I'm just not a big fan of micro HDMI. You know, they tend to move around very easy. They're just not a very stable connection. It's not like a full-size HDMI like my S1 has. So that is kind of a con, but it's not a huge thing. The other thing is that this camera shoots 8-bit 420 internally. So 8-bit is the amount of information that it's storing when it comes to your color and luminance, latitude, and those things are very important when it comes to post-production work. So my S1 shoots in 10-bit, other cameras can shoot 12-bit, 14-bit, and what that does is it gives you more room to move around your image in post, to play with colors. If you got exposure wrong and things like that, you can manipulate it more before it starts to degrade the image. So with any 8-bit camera, which pretty much any camera that you find in this price point is going to be 8-bit, you have to make sure that you expose your image properly. So if you don't expose your image properly, you're going to have a hard time changing it in post and making it still look good. It's not that it's not doable, it just takes more work, and you can degrade your image quite a bit. The other con on this camera, which is probably the biggest con that most people will tell you about any Panasonic camera, is the autofocus. If you want good autofocus, you need to go with something like Sony or Canon. Those are going to be the best in the market for autofocus. Panasonic is not good for autofocus. It can still autofocus, but you'll find it hunting and things like that. That's what they're notorious for. So that's pretty much it for my review on the Panasonic G85. My list of pros was much longer than my list of cons. I definitely love this camera, and I still recommend it to people today. So I hope this has given you enough information to help you to decide whether or not this camera is worth it to you. If you have any further questions, because I'm sure I missed a few things, let me know down in the comment section below. I would love to help you guys out and love to connect with you guys. And also, if you found this video helpful, please hit that thumbs up. It definitely helps this channel out. And please hit that subscribe button if you are not subscribed, and please hit that bell so you get notified of future videos. But other than that, that's pretty much it. I will see you guys on the next one.